Hello, and welcome to Wise Counsel Research's Introduction to Plato's Dialogue, the Euthyphro. Imagine that you are walking up the courthouse steps to hear your indictment for a capital crime. There you bump into someone who's well known as the town crackpot. Would you stop to spend an hour or two speaking with him about his views of the legal system? Probably not. But this is exactly what Socrates appears to do in the Euthyphro. Socrates is 70 years old. He has been indicted for impiety and for corrupting the young. Now, at that time, these were capital crimes, and as we know from Plato's Apology and Phaedo, Socrates is soon to be found guilty and executed. So at the beginning of the Euthyphro, Socrates is walking up the courthouse steps. There, Euthyphro meets him, and they engage in a dialogue about piety. The topic is certainly relevant to Socrates' situation. Is it relevant to our situation today? Piety sounds like an old-fashioned virtue. Some people today might be more comfortable with spirituality. But maybe piety is not even a virtue. After all, many terrorists defend their barbaric deeds by claiming they are acting piously. At the same time, toleration, diversity, and sustainability could be called modern-day pieties. It seems that before we praise it or denounce it, we must ask, what is piety? And that is exactly the question that Socrates asks here. Now, Euthyphro seems like an odd person to ask. He is at best unorthodox. He claims to know secret teachings about the gods. He even claims to be a prophet. As a result, people, the many, laugh at him. But maybe that means that Socrates could learn something from Euthyphro. Socrates, too, appears unorthodox. People say that he's bringing in new gods. Elsewhere, he himself says that a daimonic voice talks to him. But instead of laughing at him, the many want him dead. Maybe Euthyphro could teach Socrates how to amuse the many rather than infuriate them. The dialogue falls into three main parts. The first part introduces us to Euthyphro and his beliefs. The second long part consists of Euthyphro's attempts to answer Socrates' question, what is piety? The third, very brief part concludes the conversation. The first part highlights that while at first glance Euthyphro and Socrates appear somewhat similar, upon deeper inspection they are quite different. In fact, Euthyphro more closely resembles the many than he does Socrates. For example, Euthyphro claims to know the truth about the gods. The many also claim to know the truth about the gods, which they call orthodoxy. Socrates, in contrast, says here that he possesses no knowledge of such things. Euthyphro boasts about his knowledge. The many, too, are loud in proclaiming what they believe they know. Socrates, in contrast, is famously ironic. He hides his knowledge. Further, it turns out that Euthyphro is at the court in order to prosecute his father for murder, just as Zeus indicted and punished his own father. The many, too, are prosecutors, most importantly, prosecutors of Socrates. Socrates never accuses anyone of anything. He never seeks to punish anyone. Finally, Euthyphro is prone to anger, first at his father, and then at the end of the dialogue, at Socrates. The many too get angry, with deadly results. Socrates never gets angry at anyone. Though at first glance, Euthyphro may seem to be an oddball, he and the people share many traits in common. His is not so much a divergence from the common view as it is a refinement. Perhaps Socrates speaks with Euthyphro to remind himself of what he is up against. Let's look briefly at the central section of the dialogue, where Euthyphro offers three main answers to Socrates' question, what is piety? Euthyphro's first answer is that piety is doing what he is doing, punishing his father, just as Zeus punished his father. Put generally, piety is doing what the gods do, or imitating the gods. This answer seems to set Euthyphro against the many. The many say that piety is doing what the gods say we should do, not doing what they do. But Euthyphro's answer is not crazy. If the gods are much better than us, it would make sense to try to imitate them as much as we weak mortals can. Also, in the dialogue that immediately precedes this one in Socrates' life, the Theaetetus, Socrates himself gives a speech in which he says that philosophy amounts to imitating the divine. So why should we imitate Zeus according to Euthyphro? Because Zeus is most just. Zeus's justice demands our respect. The many too would admit this. But if God is just, and God's actions are just, then not doing as God does would seem to be unjust. Euthyphro would be right to do as Zeus does. It seems to be a problem. Now, one resolution of this problem would be to say that justice is relative to the actor, to the person who's doing the deed. God's justice is not our justice. Justice is not universal. But then why should we respect God's justice as better than ours? And more to the point, why should God respect and reward our justice? Indeed, could we even know what God's justice is? Maybe what we take to be God's justice is actually divine tyranny. Euthyphro's claim that we should imitate the gods rests upon a belief that there is justice and that this justice is universal, applying to gods and men. That's not a loony claim. Indeed, it appears to underlie conventional piety as well. Euthyphro just thinks through that piety more consistently than do most people. And Socrates sympathizes with Euthyphro in this attempt. Socrates says that though he claims to have no knowledge about the gods, he finds it hard to accept that the gods would fight with each other. Why? Because their quarreling would reveal that they are ignorant of justice. If they are to be gods, worthy of our respect, they should know what's right and wrong and not be squabbling with each other like needy, selfish mortals. Justice is above both gods and men. So maybe justice is the true God. Socrates' comment seems to prompt Euthyphro's second definition of piety, that piety is that which all the gods love. Piety would not mean taking sides with one god against another, and no god could get angry with us and punish us for being pious. Piety would seem to be attainable and good for us. Now, because God's love makes piety pious, piety would be defined by God. It would be completely in God's power. And that means that nothing would limit God from rewarding us for doing pious things. But that's exactly the nub of the argument, as Socrates points out. Is piety pious because God loves it, or does God love it because it is pious? Euthyphro wants to say the former, that God makes piety pious. God is in control. But he also wants to say the latter, that God loves piety because it is pious. The problem with the latter position is, as Socrates shows, it still leaves piety undefined. So why would Euthyphro want to say that? Well, it's because if God can define piety however he wishes, then God would not be bound by anything higher than his own will. God could be a wicked tyrant who defines piety as something terrible for human beings. Now, Euthyphro does not want to take this step, even though it means contradicting himself, because he believes that the gods, and above all Zeus, are just. Thus, it's not surprising that his third and final answer identifies piety as part of justice. So Socrates asks him, what does this justice involve? Euthyphro says it amounts to caring for the gods. Pious people help the gods. Help them do what? Well, Euthyphro gets flustered and corrects himself. Well, the care is prayer and sacrifice. But what are prayers and sacrifices, if not requests and gifts? Now the gods do not need our gifts, but we want their help. So our supposed care looks really just like bartering. Now Socrates in this line of argument appears to be joking, but his humor conceals a serious point. It questions the possibility of any sacrifice. Sacrifice seems just a commercial transaction. But if that's the case, if our trade with the gods is aimed at securing our own good, then why should we claim that we deserve the gods' help? Our help looks deeply self-interested. The gods start to look like the tools of man. At this point, Euthyphro could have said, I'm so confused, I thought I knew what I was saying, I thought I possessed knowledge about the gods, but I don't know anything at all. Instead, he gets angry. He blames Socrates for confusing him. He holds on to the belief that he, Euthyphro, knows what piety is. Euthyphro's belief is too strong, too pleasing for him to let it go. Now, with respect to this belief, its content and its power, Euthyphro seems wholly on the side of the many. Socrates has learned here on the courthouse steps exactly what he can expect of his jurors. Euthyphro is a prophet. In an ironic way, his reaction prophesizes Socrates' end. To conclude then, Plato's Euthyphro examines the question, what is piety? This theoretical question parallels a personal question. Is Socrates pious? If the answer to that latter question is yes, then piety would take its place, alongside courage, moderation, and justice, as a virtue of the philosopher, of the excellent human being. But if the city answers that personal question with a definite no, and this dialogue suggests that Socrates would not have disagreed. Well, that's our brief introduction to Plato's Euthyphro from Wise Counsel Research. Thank you for joining us. I look forward to sharing more thoughts with you in the future.